Good morning, everybody. We're going to get started. I want to welcome you to day 3 of the Education and Vitality Forum. It's been so exciting to spend time with you over the last 2 days. We've heard some amazing presentations. I love that the Denver Creed yesterday morning called us family. I thought that was very appropriate, and that's kind of, I guess, how I come to think about our gathering over the past 2 days. So today we have a wonderful keynote speaker who will open the day. Toula Drimonis is with us. Just a couple of notes. After the keynote, we have a coffee break, and then we have a series of 4 very exciting parallel presentations. And then the day will be closed with closing remarks by Lorraine O'Donnell and Raymond Theberge, who is the Commissioner of Official Languages of Canada. So stick around. This is a half day today. It will be a wonderful closure to our conference. So I'll pass on the mic now to my wonderful colleague, Anita Aloisio, who will introduce our keynote speaker.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Lena. Thank you, Anna. Isn't it a wonderful forum? It's already the 3rd day. It's been very exciting. And again, I'm very honored to be able to share all these presentations with you. So today, I'm also very happy to be the keynote of a colleague of mine, a good friend. We've been, let's say, sharing our mutual work together for many years, and we share mutual affinities. I'm a research associate at QUESCREN. I'm also a documentary filmmaker as well, and I have the privilege also to apply those skills that I have here within the research network. My interests are particularly focused on linguistic policies in Quebec and their impact on immigrant groups and other cultural minorities. So you can also already see the link with our keynote. Before I introduce our keynote, I'd like to just mention that the presentation will last about 25 minutes to 30 minutes. We'll be able to take your questions during the keynote afterwards. We'll be using Slido. Yes, right there. And it's a really practical application that you can download with your phone. No? Scan with your phone, not download, scan with your phone, and then you can write up your questions and we can take them in a sequential form. You can also ask questions traditionally if you wish, if time permits. So without no further ado, I'm really, really happy to be able to introduce to you our keynote speaker for this morning, Toula Drimonis. She is a Montreal-based opinion columnist, writer, and news producer. She is a former news director for TC Media, and her byline has appeared in national and international publications with a focus on politics, social justice, immigration, and women's issues. She writes weekly columns for the Montreal Gazette and Cult Montreal, and a monthly column for the Walrus. She's worked in television, radio, and print. She was on the advisory board for Use the Right Words, a national media guide on how to report on sexual violence. And in 2020, she published her first book, We, the Others, Allophones, Immigrants, and Belonging in Canada. I read that book, and if you haven't, I really urge you to get a copy right away. It resonates very, very strongly with myself and what I'm sure many of you. So Toula, here we are. Please come up for our wonderful presentation.
Thank you for having me. I'm going to try to get it as close as possible so I'm not screaming this out. Thank you for being here this morning. It's a nice turnout. And for someone who spends a lot of time with her laptop and in complete solitude most of the time when I'm writing, it's nice to be here with you guys today. So first of all, I want to thank QUESCREN for the invite and for the opportunity to speak on such an important topic that you know, is very close to my heart. It's something that I write about often, and I think having the opportunity to be able to speak on this, in a way, I don't want to bore you. I feel that I don't need to repeat, you know, points that have already been discussed. In academia, sometimes we tend to speak to each other and we tend to kind of be preaching to the choir. And I feel that me being here today is possibly opening the door to speak about these topics in a potentially different way, or just expand the conversation. So when I was thinking about what I wanted to do, can everyone hear me? Yes, okay. When I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about, I decided to settle on a speech that reminds us why we need to remain vigilant and vocal as an English-speaking community, share my own perspective as an English-speaking allophone who works primarily in English in Quebec, and I wanted to share the perspectives of Quebecers on the ground. These are challenging times. The current government has cut educational budgets drastically, and English language institutions have not been spared. On the contrary, they're often presented as a problem to the survival of Quebec's French language and culture. And they've been the target of repeated attempts to reduce their linguistic influence and financial viability. Our institutions must continue to fight for adequate funding and resources, address declining enrollment, and work to ensure quality education. But they also need to continue raising public awareness of their strengths and their value and their many contributions to Quebec. I'm a big fan of correcting misinformation and harmful rhetoric. It's important to balance out the negative rhetoric with a reminder that historically this province has not only benefited, but continues to benefit from the contributions of the English-speaking community and every other community that calls Quebec home. What makes Montreal and Quebec so wonderful owes a lot to Quebecers whose mother tongue isn't French. From Leonard Cohen to Wilder Penfield and the work done at the Neuro Institute, to the organizers of the oldest St. Patrick's Day parade in North America, to the Montreal Gazette, the oldest continuously published newspaper in Canada, to the English community being pioneers in French immersion and bilingual education in Quebec, to the excellence of our post-secondary institutions, I can think of the Nobel Prizes that have been won by McGill University, or Concordia's recent Star Sailor launch as a historic event for Canadian rocketry, to artists like Oscar Peterson, Heather O'Neill, Jay Baruchel, and William Shatner. Our community continues to shine and contribute to Quebec's reputation internationally. From scientific and medical research to business, philanthropy, to the arts, we continue to contribute. And our institutions benefit all Quebecers, regardless of language. So I was thinking of what one of our biggest assets is. And in my personal opinion, remember, this is opinion. I don't claim to be an expert on these topics, but obviously I do have my perspective that has been shaped by years of research and speaking to people and experts. In my opinion, one of the biggest assets our institutions focus on bilingualism and diversity, which foster openness and prepare students for a successful life and careers anywhere they choose to work in the world. I think it's something that should be emphasized continuously. And I urge graduates to include that fact every time they're being interviewed, every time they're in the public eye. I have to say that as a journalist, I'm routinely shocked at how few French Quebecers sometimes are aware of the amount of French that is being taught in English schools. It continues to shock me. And often that shocked reaction comes from French journalists who I would expect should know better. So I think we need to do a better job of emphasizing that and publicizing that. Because as someone who spends a lot of time online speaking to, average Quebecer, the average French Quebecer, there are a lot of people that continue to believe that English schools are only teaching in English, that there isn't real French immersion. I think there's a lack of knowledge on this still to this day. So I think we need to be disseminating this information. One of the biggest obstacles, in my opinion, which threatens the community's vitality and continued public support from the French majority, is the fact that Quebec's English-speaking community is often not seen as a real and legitimate linguistic minority by many French-speaking Quebecers. We continue to be misunderstood and seen by many in Quebec as a privileged, affluent, powerful community that refuses to speak French and pines for its glory days. Nothing could be further from the truth. In my frequent interactions with those who see English institutions as unnecessary or even threatening to them, I see one fundamental problem. the inability to understand the difference between the English language and its powerful dominance in Canada, North America, and around the world, and Quebec's English-speaking community, a linguistic minority that simply seeks to protect and preserve its institutions and its minority language rights. And these are two distinct entities, yet they continue to overlap in many people's minds. I think we need to do more work to clarify this and raise public awareness, foster dialogue, to build respect and cooperation, and counter prejudice, and continue to demonstrate the value of linguistic diversity. As many of you already know, the vast majority of English-speaking Quebecers speak French. Despite that, they experience higher unemployment, lower median incomes than French-speaking Quebecers, are more likely to be living under the poverty line. And Bill 96 has created further barriers to accessing healthcare and other public services. Recent government measures affecting English language CEGEPs and universities have affected our institutions' budgets and autonomy deeply, and deliberately target our higher learning institutions in an attempt to kneecap them, reduce their linguistic influence, and limit the number of out-of-province and international students attending Quebec institutions. As we head into a provincial election, it's imperative that anyone involved in English language education strategically drown out any divisive rhetoric by collaborating and working hand in hand with Quebecers of all languages who believe in a stronger and united Quebec that values all its members. Quebec wins when all its educational institutions do well and thrive and produce competent, skilled, bilingual, and multilingual Quebecers who feel like they can stay here and build a good life here. And that can take many forms: collaborating closely with local media and journalists to present the community's points of view, engaging the younger generation to participate in public awareness, as well as parents, teachers, and administrators. I know a lot of that is already taking place, but we need to do more. Working in collaboration with French-speaking Quebecers, including media, who value the English community's contributions, is equally important. We can't afford to be seen as an out-of-touch, aging group of constant naysayers, but a dynamic, bilingual, well-integrated minority in touch with today's diversity, simply defending its rights. Constant parental and community involvement, recruiting qualified staff and ensuring accessible resources, establishing a broader cross-sector of community partnerships, fighting for policy making that includes our input, something that has been lacking sorely the last few years, in my opinion, and also recognizing that Quebec's English community, just like francophones and allophones, and I'm using those terms even though I know they're more and more becoming obsolete, that the English community isn't a monolith, but contains multitudes of experiences, perspectives, and backgrounds, and it should all be represented. In today's Quebec, there are many Anglophones who identify equally as Francophone, allophones who identify as English speakers who prefer no labels at all. As the linguistic demographics are changing, so is the way that we often define ourselves. And it's important that everyone feels that they have a voice. There's a plurality to Quebecers that continues to fascinate me. And way too often, politicians try to pigeonhole people into boxes that in today's Quebec feel increasingly outdated and irrelevant. As a longtime columnist and writer of 2 books on immigration, identity, and othering, I often get a lot of people who reach out to me to express their feelings about their place in Quebec. I think they feel that they can relate to what I say, so they feel comfortable voicing these opinions. A lot of English speakers feel that they are facing increasing challenges, and government legislation sometimes has some of us feeling like second-class citizens. The risk we run in this scenario is that when you spend so much time simply trying to justify your existence and your constitutionally protected rights, fighting legal battles against legislation that affects you, you often have reduced energy and resources to focus on the task at hand. We were discussing that earlier, Chris. And the task at hand is to ensure quality education that produces quality graduates, quality citizens, and leaders of tomorrow. The political device to pit English and French educational institutions against each other and try to convince Quebecers that it's a zero-sum game and that the Francophone majority somehow wins when the English-speaking minority loses is frankly exhausting. But it's mostly counterproductive. Balancing the rights and needs of Quebec's English-speaking community with the province's goal of promoting French will always remain a challenge here, and often a source of frustration for both linguistic communities. But it can be done. We need to continue to foster collaboration and constant discussion, raising public awareness of our contributions, advocating for more resources and funding to provide quality education in both languages, to promote a vision that doesn't leave anyone behind. A Quebec that embraces French and English and all the other languages that can be heard in Montreal, and increasingly in the regions. A Quebec that's proud of its educational institutions regardless of language. I know it occasionally feels like an uphill battle, but I want to assure you that there are many Quebec Francophones who feel strongly about this too, who recognize that Quebec is stronger because all of us, not some of us, who understand that those who attack and undermine Quebec's English language educational institutions are attacking Quebec's educational institutions. We all benefit from better educated bilingual and trilingual Quebecers who contribute to our society. So we need to be vigilant, we need to be loud, we need to lead by example and strategically remain advocates for our community. Most importantly, we need to provide hope to the younger generations of English-speaking Quebecers coming up in these institutions that they can stay here and succeed, because our institutions have the means and the tools and the know-how to give them what they need to accomplish a better life. But how do we do that? Writing the speech, I was aware of two major things. First of all, I haven't grown up in Quebec's English-speaking community because I left Quebec when I was 9 years old and I grew up in Greece. So I went to Greek educational institutions. And B, not being a parent or a school administrator or an educator myself, I lack first-person knowledge of the system. And my point of view has fundamentally been shaped by speaking to people over the years and interviewing people. And I'm not a fan of writing about things that I don't know well. As a journalist, however, I'm a big fan of crowdsourcing. So, to be heard, through my speech, I conducted a tiny experiment online. I reached out and English language education and institutions meant to people and what it evoked in them. I wanted to gain not only on-the-ground perspectives of educators, administrators, present and former students, parents, but I also wanted to gauge the level of interest for the topic. And now I want to share a few of those perspectives. While they are all personal opinions, I do think that they do a good job of representing the plurality of voices in the community. So here are some. Anglophones in Quebec will always be a unique thing and will always be different from anything else. Preserving and maintaining the vitality of Quebec's English schools is very important. Acknowledging that English speakers in Quebec are multifaceted and can also be considered French speakers. Making sure that kids come out with strong reading and writing skills. It would mean a massive resource increase for special needs support to foster retention of at-risk students. Regarding the vitality of English CEGEPs, the government should sit down with various directors in good faith and revise the implementation of recent reforms so as to put students' interests above all considerations. One parent wrote, "I made sure to support the English system by sending my kids to it. The best part, they have excellent French programs." So that's something we should continue to emphasize. Many, of course, mentioned the importance of English school boards. Without even getting into the cultural impact of English schools, the fights over the existence of school boards and the application of Bill 21 have been really important flashpoints in the battle for democracy. The school boards were abolished in a deliberate attempt to revoke access to the democratic process and normalize authoritarian government overreach. Because of the autonomy of our English school boards, we were able to wield our institutional power and fight back. And I think that's a really important point. Others, of course, focused on funding, the ways of the funding, making sure people have access to resources where students can choose where and how they want to learn without barriers. And it means keeping Quebec open to innovation, collaboration, and focusing on bilingualism. Others advocated for more consultation and collaboration with the government. Many people actually told me that they wanted English schools to be kept in the loop about Ministry of Education decisions. That has been a constant refrain over the past couple of years, especially with reforms in CEGEPs and universities. Many educators that I've spoken to have repeatedly told me how they feel blindsided. They didn't feel like they were consulted, But I mean, without getting too political, that seems to be across the board with the current government, unfortunately. Others emphasized our institution's teaching innovations. And this is a direct quote. I'm a teacher in the French CEDEC system, and though I value the institutions I work in, I consistently look to the English schools for inspiration and pedagogical practices. Though they represent only about 5 of Quebec's 48 CEGEPs, the English institutions are driving innovation in teaching and learning. So let's emphasize that. And as a journalist and as a former assignment editor, I want to reach out to anyone who's working in communications. Pitch media these stories. Send out press releases. I know a lot of this is already being done, but it's good to repeat it. Find an angle that works. Journalists are currently stretched. Newsrooms are overwhelmed. I can tell you, from personal experience. There will be no assignment editor that will love you more than if you hand them a ready-made story with, something that they can sink their teeth into. And learn to circle back. Just because someone doesn't respond to you the first time around doesn't mean they're not interested. They could be overwhelmed, busy. Insist, keep pitching those stories. Others, of course, spoke of the importance of regional realities. And I know that Anita and QUESCREN recently produced a documentary on regional realities. And I think it's really important to remember that when we speak of the English community, it's not just Montreal, right? There are a lot of other people that beyond. And there was a comment that I received that I personally found very moving that speaks to the importance of maintaining that vitality. Perhaps something not always appreciated by Montreal Anglophones is that in the regions, the English school is quite often the last and only institution that the community has any direct control over. Institutions are the heart of any community, and without them, vitality begins to wither. You can see this easily in a place like Gaspé, where the high school graduation of Sec 5 kids is attended by a wide swath of adults in the community, including many whose own kids graduated decades ago and have now moved away. You see this equally with school fundraisers, theater and musical productions, grassroots efforts to help students who are struggling. In many cases, the school is the rallying point for the community to exercise its existence in the present and the future. Others spoke of the pride and community spirit found in the English school system, and that's a selling point if I ever saw one. When you're in the system, you can see just how vibrant and engaged the community is, how we are relatively small and yet full of talent and people willing to step up and participate. I always tell my daughter that she has a great advantage being in a smaller pool with equally interesting and diverse opportunities. It means things like getting a place in the EMSB choir, honor band, Model UN, you name it. And a final comment I received as a poignant reminder to be proud of what we have. I want to share the words of a French Quebecer who's married to an English Quebecer, something that's quite common here, whose child completed elementary in French and is now going to high school in English. And she had this to say: "What a stark difference from the French education system. The biggest insight I get is how community and school culture and pride are experienced so differently. Perhaps it's powered by its fragility, from financing to staffing, but it has a fiercely loyal nature, a generational one, that appears absent from French education. So protecting its vitality means protecting its viability, honoring its minority status, its value in the greater Québécois culture, an identity that is shared by staff and students. There is a pride here that deserves to be protected because they are proud Québécois who will contribute greatly to our society in both languages without forgetting the community that raised them." To recap, the responses I received covered a cross-section of perspectives. In their own way, everyone emphasized the importance of protecting Quebec's English language education system, citing its unique culture, community pride, and contributions. Most people highlighted the need for autonomy, adequate funding, access to resources, as well as addressing issues like Bill 96 restrictions. Preserving school boards and promoting bilingualism were also high on people's priorities. But what the multitude of answers, most importantly, the rapidity of responses, solidified for me was the level of interest within the community for the subject matter and the deep involvement and attachment many of us share for our institutions and the value of education in general. For me, that was the part that was most motivating because it revealed the extent of the community's interest to continue fighting. So yes, we need to understand that a sustainable future for English education in Quebec depends on a few non-negotiable things: adequate funding and resources, finding a way to address declining enrollment, retaining English-speaking youth, especially in rural areas, strengthening the educational offer of our schools, ensuring we find concrete ways to support the entire educational continuum from early childhood to post-secondary, fostering community vitality by developing high-quality resources, and creating strong community institutional partnerships. My final point, we're almost done. Having said all that, it's equally important for Quebec's English language institutions to go beyond Quebec and always keep in mind that educational institutions of any language located in any province or country have the ultimate responsibility of equipping students with the knowledge, tools, values, and most importantly, in this dangerous age of disinformation, the critical thinking skills necessary to not only address local challenges, but global ones as well. If the goal is to educate future leaders who will pursue a more just and sustainable world, we need to constantly challenge ourselves and rethink how and what we teach, and even the very purpose of education. Teachers aren't just preparing tomorrow's workforce, but the next generation of innovators, problem solvers, and leaders. Living in a bubble, a linguistic minority within a linguistic minority, runs the risk of us remaining stuck in parochial thinking, focusing solely on linguistic battles and legal challenges, and the government's attempts to divide and conquer. Every time we fight for our schools, our institutions, the quality of the education that English-speaking Quebecers receive, we fight for the vitality of each and every community we belong to. In my writing, both in my book, We the Others, and in my columns, I often broach the topic of layers and multiple identities. As a trilingual allophone Quebecer, whose first language is Greek, who primarily lives and works in English, yet has incredible love and appreciation for the French language and culture, every day I try to navigate my multiple identities, hoping that they all thrive. Because many English speakers are more than just English speakers. We're also French speakers, or Italian, or Punjabi speakers. I'm a Quebecer, I'm a Montrealer, I'm Greek, I'm a Canadian. So many people around me here are multiple things. And those are more than just descriptors. They are strengths and unique attributes that can propel the whole of our parts towards a better future. It is only in embracing all of our identities, languages, skills, the coexistence of all of that, emphasizing, fostering, and cultivating all the parts of who we are, that we can become stronger, more flexible and adaptable, ultimately more resilient. I think that those are strong foundations for a successful and sustainable future, which can ensure both the vitality and fundamental purpose of our English-speaking institutions in Quebec and beyond. I want to thank you very much for your time. And again, I want to extend my gratitude to the QUESCREN team for the invite and for allowing me to get away from my laptop. Thank you. Go and just sit there.
You can sit there. Thank you, Toula. Really insightful. And we definitely feel your on-the-ground work of interpreting data, your research, as well as being in contact with the very people that experience the day-to-day life in Quebec. So thank you for that. I'm wondering if you were all able to scan the QR code here so that we were ready to take some questions. Are they coming through? Oh, there are questions. Oh, here we go. Wonderful. Okay. I'm going to roam around. Let's see. Oh, here too. Wonderful. Okay. Okay, number one, should advocacy groups be held accountable for their role in the division perpetuating the angry phone stereotype? Maybe we can use the mic. Oh, use this. Okay.
Should advocacy groups be, can you repeat the question? Should they?
Here we go. Should advocacy groups be held accountable for their role in the division perpetuating the angry phone stereotype? So the angry phone stereotype.
Can you hear me? Yes. It's a loaded question because it's hard to answer that one. And by no means, I'm not an expert on, many of these questions that you're potentially asking me, right? It's just my opinion as a columnist and a writer and a journalist. It depends. Which ones are we talking about here? I don't think that there's much of that lately. I feel like there's been a toning down of a lot of the discourse. There are a lot of advocacy groups for the English community that I feel are working very hard to collaborate with the government, with French-speaking groups. But at the same time, I think it's a very subjective kind of, perspective, because they're an advocacy group. They're advocacy groups. That's their raison d'être, to kind of point out things and to fight for rights. And sometimes some do it louder than others, and maybe less polite terms, or. But there are a lot of advocacy groups out there that are working really hard on the ground, pushing forward legal challenges and constantly raising public awareness and expressing the points of views of people in the community that do not have the time or the inclination to spend time explaining why this is important. Because I can tell you as a journalist that, again, as I mentioned the example earlier about how I continue to be shocked by the fact that many in the French-speaking community do not understand the extent of English, of French that is being taught in our English school system. I think many people, many French Quebecers, if legislation doesn't impact you directly, and I've seen this with Bill 21, I've seen this with Bill 94, Bill 96, if it doesn't impact you directly, you have the inclination, it's human nature to kind of not focus on the details. And that's where the details are usually the issue most of the time, right? And that's where we need to be focusing on. So I don't know. There are certain, without mentioning groups or mentioning names, I think sometimes you need to be careful about how you approach these issues and how you publicize your dissent, and you fight for your rights. I think it needs to be done in a way, in a very clear, non-confrontational necessarily way, where you just present the facts and allow people to reach the conclusions. It doesn't need to be in a confrontational way. You don't need to be angry to necessarily point to how your minority language rights are probably being infringed by something specific or by Bill 96. I don't know if I answered the question. I'm not sure who asked it.
I think so. Follow-up, is it clear for everyone?
I think there's a fine line, and I don't begrudge people who are working really hard to point out that some of the government legislation actually does harm to our institutions and our minority rights. I think it's fair game. And some people are less, even me on any given day, some days I'm more polite about it than others, and some days I'm frustrated and, I waste my time arguing with people online, and I'm like, why am I doing this? But we're human.
Does that necessarily mean that we're angry phones because we're disputing something?
I'm not a big fan of those tropes. Yeah. I think it's a trope that serves a particular group of people, that they want you to be an angry phone. They want that trope. And I do believe that it's important to not allow people to use that, to instrumentalize, that trope and that that kind of idea of an angry phone. But I think it's important to not silence your voice either, because you're afraid that you might be perceived as such.
And have it present perhaps on Francophone media. I had my question right here. So how do we get more coverage on Francophone media and more positive?
Keep persisting, reach out. It's not just mainstream media. There are a lot of alternative media outlets right now that are doing great work, being able to, amplifying the voices of minorities. And whether people understand it or appreciate it or want to believe it, the English-speaking community in Quebec remains a linguistic minority. It is a linguistic minority, whether some people acknowledge it as such. Keep fighting. I know that there are people within the English community that continuously reach out to La Presse, Le Devoir, to publish opinion letters, and sometimes they, I don't think they should take it personally. It's editors, assignment editors, opinion letter, they don't have often the space, the time to deal with every opinion letter that comes through, but you need to be persistent. You need to keep fighting. You need to create ties, reach out to people who are sympathetic and have the willingness to listen to these perspectives, and make sure, write them in French, send them out to Francophone media, and make sure that they're heard.
Even though there may be a natural selection of those of themes that the media doesn't necessarily align with.
I think sometimes there is some gatekeeping. I've seen it myself. I think everyone does it to a certain extent. It's not just, French media, English media can do it as well. But I think you need to just be persistent, and I think you need to make sure that it's publicized in French, it's written, it's sent out, and do not discard online alternative media. It's not just mainstream. It's not, print media is suffering. We have one English paper left, and there's a couple, in print and French. I think online is where a lot of people live these days, and I think it's important to use all the tools that you have at your disposal.
To that point, another question: what do Francophone pundits gain by promoting incorrect images of who Anglos are, or if we'd have to determine what an Anglo is nowadays?
Jesus, too early for all these loaded questions. Again, my perspective. I think it plays into, I think these tropes play into, because they're very simplistic, right? And not only are they simplistic, they're very outdated. They're very outdated tropes. This notion of anglophones that don't want to speak French and don't like French culture and don't know anything about Quebec French. Like, it's so foreign to my reality on the ground, and I think for most of you here, I think we're all proud to speak French. It's an asset to our daily lives. I feel very, very much a Quebecer. I get the jokes, I get what's going on. I follow pop culture. I read tons of stuff, tons of books in French. And I feel these tropes exist because to a certain degree, it's political. I think the sovereigntist movement really benefits from seeing allophones and anglophones as enemies, as people who don't want to work together, as people who are actively harming the French culture and the French language, which isn't true, because as I've said in my book, my ability to speak English or speak Greek does not prevent my ability to speak French. It's an extension. Everything that you know and everything that you learn is an extension of who you are. It's not one or the other, and I think these tropes benefit politicians, and usually the columnists who engage in, without again naming names, but all right, Quebecer, and they also have a very specific agenda to divide, to sell that that dream of an independent Quebec, which as a journalist and as a citizen, I don't have anything against. If you can convince enough people, go for it. But this is not the way to do it. I feel that it creates a lot of division, a lot of bad blood, and it constantly targets and marginalizes minority groups, whether it's English speakers, whether it's Muslims seem to be the target of the day these days, religious communities. I think it's very deliberate and it's very strategic. And that's what I meant when I said earlier, we need to constantly be fighting against misinformation and these tropes. We need to push back with factual information, because I think the average Quebecer can be convinced, if they receive factual information and the data that supports something else, that proves that is not the case. When someone says, oh, Anglophones or allophones, they don't speak French, they're not interested, and you respond with statistics that prove that 94.4, maybe it's higher now, of Quebecers do speak, an adequate amount of French, maybe not perfectly, but an adequate amount of French. I think that counteracts a lot of these tropes.
There's still some more work to be done.
Oh, for sure, for
you
sure.
Still don't get it, as you were.
No, I don't. I think the English community does as well, and there are allophones that live in their bubbles as well. I think there needs to be more rapprochement, more coming together, more speaking to each other, more building bridges, more opportunities to maybe have forums with everyone coming together, with French speaking journalists, English speaking journalists, not just if we're constantly speaking to the, preaching to the choir. It's great and it probably feels good and everyone's nodding and going, yeah, I get it and I relate to this. But what are we accomplishing at the end of the day? Are the people who really need to hear some of this, are they here today? I don't know.
Stronger solicitation of all parties.
Are there any French media, French speaking media covering any of this? Are they,
I think we solicit them regularly to have everyone at the table,
but
and somehow it doesn't fit their schedule in some shape or form.
That's the thing. I feel like it's constantly fighting against these notions of you receive a press release and you're like, another angry or another self-righteous little group that's living in its own little bubble. How do you counteract that? How do you fight against that vision, this image, of someone who's closed-minded and living in their own little world and doesn't really understand what Quebec is today?
We're working on it.
I know.
Well, on that note, so your thoughts on Bill 1 and the proposal for a Quebec constitution?
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm going through this.
Sure.
I don't know if I missed any questions, but it seems to be a natural segue to.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I could add it along with all the other. I just finished writing a piece for Cult Montreal that was in their print edition. This issue just came out, I think, is just published, about the democratic decline that's taking place. And I'm not sure people have. I think when governments have a strategy of overwhelming citizens, constantly attacking and constantly ramming through legislation, it overwhelms and it distracts. And I think it works really well because people are, like when you're being attacked from every angle, you don't know what to focus on. And sometimes you just give up because you've got bills to pay and your kids want something from you or whatever. You're not feeling, your knees hurting, whatever. Like we're constantly living our lives and have a million different things to deal with. And I think there's a serious democratic decline that's been taking place here right now with this particular government, not to get like overly political, but I mean, you asked about it. So I think it aligns with a lot of legislation that has been rammed through by this government. I have a problem with it, as do many, many other people, because it defends a singular vision again, a singular idea of what a Quebecer is supposed to be like and what they're supposed to sound like. And what they're supposed to believe in. And I have a real problem. I mean, I wrote an entire book because of the fact that I really reject this notion of, a society that is just one shade of beige. Like, there's such a plurality and such a richness in Montreal and in Quebec in general as it's expanding, its immigration. And to me, diversity and plurality are such beautiful things. They expand our world. They add, the fact that I live next to everyone here who has different perspectives and different backgrounds and different mother tongues, to me is not a problem. It's an asset. It's a beautiful thing. And I feel that we're constantly being told that it's problematic and that we need to somehow minimize and limit ourselves and who we are and everything that we have to offer. So it's problematic for me. And I think just like a lot of other legislation that has been introduced by this government, it's rammed through. There's never any consultation. It feels like it was written on a napkin. They got together and they were like, this is what we're going to do. I think a lot of this legislation is very strategic, like I said, to overwhelm and to present this idea for their base that they're working really hard, to do something for them, when and I've said this before many times on social media in my columns, I keep repeating it, that this government has been very masterful at solving non-existing problems and solving none of the real ones. We're we're still dealing with all the major issues, access, no access to doctors, the fact that we have a huge homelessness problem, the fact that the cost of living is huge, the fact that people can't afford rent. Like, these are the issues people should be focusing on. And yet this government is like decided, Quebec Constitution was what they were going to focus on, and making sure that, women with hijabs can't take care of our kids in daycares. It's ludicrous to me. And I don't understand why more people aren't, standing up to be more vocal about it. So yeah, short answer, yeah, no, I'm not a fan.
Maybe it's an illusion of a unifying purpose that they're putting forth. So we better
They
move
have
on
said
and
the
adhere.
exact same thing about every piece of legislation. They said the same thing about Bill 21, 90, like everything is always about unity and coming together. I don't see how any of this has united Quebecers. On the contrary, it's been extremely divisive.
I have a few more questions. I'll in line with you not wanting to be too political, but here it seems that we're inclined.
I don't mind. I don't mind being political. It's what I do for a living. But I'm just saying,
two questions in one. So do you think the English-speaking communities would maybe do better under the PQ, or any chance that the Liberal Party can save us and challenge the PQ?
Unlike PSPP, I really am a political orphan most days. There are some times that I wake up and I feel very frustrated by all of our political parties in Quebec. I don't feel represented because I have issues with all of them. Do I think the English-speaking community will do better under the PQ? No. No, I don't. I don't, because I've been following very closely the rhetoric that's coming out from them and from their leader, and it's the same anti-immigration, xenophobic, sometimes very insular way of thinking, and also with very much a clear agenda to focus on a referendum.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I don't see any of that as beneficial to our community, let alone to Quebec in general. I don't think these things are beneficial to us. So I don't think that Plamondon would be, in any way better for us. I think the Liberals need to stand up and be more vocal if they want English votes, because there are a lot of, I can tell you a lot, especially the younger generation. I speak to the youths. I'm not that young anymore, but I speak to the youths a lot. And a lot of them are very disillusioned. They feel that, and there's a reason why a lot of them, I know that there are a lot of younger English-speaking Quebecers who have voted for Québec solidaire, because they feel like they identify more with some of the things on the platform. I feel the Liberals, if they're going to fight back, need to be more vocal and need to be stronger representing minority rights in this province. They can't just assume, the days of just expecting that people will vote, for the Liberals just because, I think are gone. So they need to be more vocal.
So also taking our responsibility as the others that identify as others, allophone communities or so-called English speakers, really take a stand behind perhaps another party or the Liberal Party to have their voices heard.
I think the English-speaking community needs to be very vocal about what it is that it wants from its politicians, from the government, from the opposition, from any party that is vying for their votes. Because like I said, as a linguistic minority, a very legitimate linguistic minority, we need to continue fighting for our institutions and our rights that I do feel are kind of under attack right now. And we need to be vocal. And if some people call that Quebec bashing, or some people call it, makes us look, I don't know, makes us look bad. I don't think it's makes us look bad or antagonistic to fight for your rights. I expect the same from French-speaking minorities in the rest of Canada, and I gladly get up and I applaud them when they do, and they resort to the courts for their rights. And I expect the same here from us.
A lot of questions coming in. Speaking about youth, how would you think the youth? How would you think that youth in the regions, right? Again, we're saying Montreal very centralized, but there are youths belonging to the English-speaking minorities that would like or should have their voices amplified. Any suggestions?
Yeah, that's a tough one because if it's hard for us here in Montreal, which is already such a diverse, city and has never been just a French city, I can't imagine how difficult the challenges must be in rural areas where the English community is much more diminished and has fewer resources. And I can assume that the younger generation probably feels like it's an uphill battle to kind of even remain there or continue fighting for its rights. I don't know. Just continue being vocal, reach out for resources. I feel like there could be more collaboration. Again, I'm not an expert on this particular subject. I feel like there's more research that's probably done on the ground with QUESCREN to broach those, and to kind of allow for those voices to be heard. But I think it's important to remind people that there are a lot of English speakers outside of Montreal, and they also need to be visible, and they also their needs and their perspectives need to be heard. And that's why I think it's important that like your documentary, regional realities and things like that are very important to raise awareness about those issues.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that what came out of those documentaries and also all our research is that the community in organizations and involvement is important, and also presence of local English media in the regions so that youth can continue to be involved or solicit their involvement is also a place for them to have voice and be able to speak about their concerns. We're also looking at how do we fight systemic marginalization in schools to help students embrace their identities if some deny the marginalization of Anglophone communities? It's a big question too. Is marginalization going on in schools?
In what way?
In what way?
I'm not sure I understand.
Does someone want to, so this is
through legislation? Like, what are we talking about exactly?
Does anyone want to specify? How do we fight systemic marginalization in schools? To help students embrace their identities, maybe regarding that in schools there is a systemic marginalization because they may be identifying as English speakers but have to go to French school. Is that the through law?
I'm not understanding the question.
Anyone want to be more specific? There.
Yes.
Yes. Here, I'll bring you the mic so that.
So myself as a teacher, I work for through the Three Rivers Academy for Central Quebec School Board, but I also teach at the Cégep de Trois-Rivières. So I do see, so my question really is, if we know that there is marginalization, for like our English minorities, right? And we know that even just the way that the attitudes, and just kind of that.
Are you referring to like government attitudes or?
Yes, I am. So then how do we fight that? Because if we want to inspire and innovate our students, and we want to be able to build that mentality of diversifying and how important that is, how do we do that?
I think it's much of, I mentioned some of it earlier during my speech, in the sense that I think we need to be amplifying our voices. I know a lot of this is already being done, so maybe I'm just repeating the work that's already taking place on the ground. But I think we need to be vocal. We need to be vocal. We need to constantly find ways to amplify our voices and explain what the reality is for us on the ground. All the amazing stuff that English schools are doing, I know a lot of that is already being done, but we need to be there's a lot to be proud of. And I think it's a cyclical thing, right? If you raise your voice to amplify those things, to be able to let people know of all the important stuff that we're contributing to and that we're doing on the daily basis, it allows other people to kind of be proud of it too, and to kind of identify with that and say, yeah, I'm part of something, I'm part of this. And also to dispel misinformation and deliberate disinformation that often takes place, from the government. Like this, it's not factual. There's so much stuff that sometimes you'll see ministers, the government coming forward with legislation, and they're basing it on non-factual, even now with Bill 2, it's incredible the stuff that they're repeating that isn't real. It's just not factual. So you need to constantly push back and keep fighting back. And you can do it in a very, doesn't have to be an emotional, I'm just going to break things. It's about, although sometimes I understand people wanting to flip tables because it is frustrating, but in a very methodical way where you provide accurate information and you say, no, this isn't the truth. This is what's happening in our schools. This is how much French is being taught. These kids are coming out bilingual, trilingual. These kids are an asset to the society, to Montreal, to Quebec. Like you have to constantly push back, because I can tell you there are still people who live in bubbles who only, like, if you are in the regions and you only read every day, you're reading, I'm gonna target now. I'm gonna go specific. You're only reading Journal de Montréal, or you're reading Mathieu Bocoté, you know, and you all of a sudden you feel like you're being invaded by, you know, Muslims or Anglophones, or you listen to speeches, political speeches that tell you that the English community or Canada is trying to deliberately demographically drown you. It's hard to kind of look at the English community and its fight for its rights and its institutions with empathy. You're like, what are you talking about? You guys are this powerful, you know, because like I said earlier, there's this inability to distinguish between English as a majority language that is omnipresent. You know, we live in a very Anglo-centric Canada. That's the reality, right? So anyone who says, oh, English is under attack, it's nonsense. You can't, but you need to explain to people, it's not English as a language that is being attacked. It's the English institution. It's our English institutions, the English community, its viability is what is in danger and needs to keep fighting back, not the language. And those are two different things that people need. It's like me turning around to a French Quebecer and going, hey, what are you talking about? French is the 5th largest, you know, most popular language in the world. You're fine. No, I do understand the concerns that French speakers have to maintain their language and their institutions in Quebec, because they live in a country that is very Anglo-centric. And the reflex, even in Montreal in many cases when it comes to business and many things, is to go for English. I get it. I get those concerns. I'm very, you know, sympathetic to that. But I think we need to be louder to explain what we're talking about when we're talking about the English community.
That's right. So just a follow-up question. We have about 6 or 7 minutes, actually 8 minutes, if I want to be on
Here,
time.
I'm not going anywhere.
But we can go over another minute if conversation gets.
It's up to you. Whatever. And
Well, just so you talked about this, but just to be clear, what are the non-mainstream media that Monsieur, Madame, tout le monde can reach out to and really, you know,
Yeah.
take a stance
Listen,
and speak against?
There's a lot of good stuff that's taking place out there. I'm thinking of Le Pivot, Pivot Québec, that is a great, you know, in French language, alternative media that does good stuff. I don't know how, you know, I'm sure English language rights is not top of their interest of things that they cover. But I think if you were to approach them with a well-written French piece, they would be interested in potentially, especially if it infringes on rights. They would be interested. I'm thinking about The Rover, where, you know, my friend Chris Curtis is doing wonderful work as well. These are alternative media. They're not mainstream, but there's more than La Presse and Le Devoir out there. There's Ricochet. I don't think Ricochet publishes in French anymore. Actually, Pivot is kind of an extension of them. There are, you know, podcasters on the ground that are doing wonderful things. For example, I don't know if anyone's familiar with a podcast called Franglais. And yeah, again, the youths, they're doing good stuff, you know, and there's a lot of on the ground podcasts by younger Quebecers, and it's where you see the evolution of Quebec, where people are coming and they're coming together and they're speaking. It's not only the evolution, it's the reality of Quebec and especially Montreal, where people are coming together and they're speaking in English and they're speaking in French and they're going back and forth and they're starting, you know, a sentence in one language and ending in another. And these are podcasts that people are following and they're interested in, and people come together and they're having these conversations. You could reach out to them, you know, and be featured. Like, there are ways to go about this gatekeeping that sometimes happens from mainstream media, that you can reach out to people. And it doesn't always have to be, because the reality is press releases are great and you're reaching out to journalists, but the average person on the ground, they're just going on about their business. You know, when I post links to my articles, it's so obvious that a huge chunk of the people have not even gone beyond the headline. It's depressing. It's depressing because they'll reach out to you with a comment, and I'm like, it's in the article, just read it. But they never did. There's an attention deficit that is existing right now. It's hard to get people. Meta has not helped our cause because you can't, post links to articles or press releases or stuff like that. So you need to be more inventive, I think, and try to find ways where you're not just preaching to the choir. Have an evening where maybe a debate, a panel where people can come together at a bar, a local or a local bookstore where people can have a glass of wine. Make it sexy. Do you know what I mean? I know it sounds silly, but I think people would be inclined to have these conversations in a setting that maybe is less academic or less strict or less, sometimes forums are great, but again, they're going to attract a certain demographic. But you need to be inventive in how you broach these things and how you come together. Otherwise, you're going to attract the same people. How do you get younger people on board? Create like a forum, a fun forum where you get maybe a couple of English writers or French writers. So it's a little, sexier, a little more approachable.
And you throw in that question and the debate starts.
Exactly.
And white wine.
And maybe some wine. And then it's going to get crazy because people are going to get uninhibited and they're going to have a good time. And it's going to be more like, hey, I want to go to this. This could be cool. And you can have like real conversations.
Notes. We've taken notes.
I think it's important it's to kind of go beyond what we have normally done.
Again, sort of that really beyond the ground.
Yeah. And I see, because I live in both worlds, three worlds, I see a lot of that taking place in the Francophone community where they have these, these panels and these forums and these discussions, and they're having them at like fun venues where people will come together and they will, have a glass of something and they'll chat. And I think it creates an environment where you're attracting people that might otherwise not be interested in coming out to these things. And then you're going to have more vibrant conversations or more, conversations that maybe mirror more younger perspectives, which I think is important.
And then can feed research questions afterwards.
Yes, exactly.
Last question here. What would Melina Mercouri do?
What? Oh, God. Who asked that question? She would never have this forum on a Sunday. It's an elite and maybe niche response. Maybe some people will get that. I don't know. Melina Mercouri was a huge supporter of the arts and culture. So I think she would probably recommend that the English community maintains and fights for its vitality through culture and its arts. I think maybe I'm, tooting my own horn here, but as an English writer and a journalist and a columnist, I think words and being vocal on the ground, and especially books, like, the Salons Livres is coming up, and we're having like Quebec Reads of book fairs. I think it's important to be on the ground and to be looking at what Quebec writers, English-speaking writers are producing and what they're talking about. Because if you do pay attention, you'll see that the younger generation of French and English-speaking Quebecers and a lot of allophones, such as myself, whose first language is something else, are producing this wonderful mix of something that is very uniquely Québécois, because despite the frustration and despite this constant, that we constantly have to fight these battles and we're complaining or we're pushing back, the reality is we're very fortunate to live in a place that clashes, and I often say this place frustrates me, but I love the constant clash because I think it produces something very unique that you can't find elsewhere. And it makes the city so vibrant, and it makes our communities vibrant, produce something very different, whether it's allophones, anglophones, francophones. There's a mix here and there's a diversity and plurality here that I think you can't find elsewhere because of Bill 101, because of the politics. And those are good things. It's nice to kind of focus on the positive too, not just,
It's like a phenomenon that emerges.
It is
in the specific context,
and it's
creatively,
and it's very unique to us to hear, and I think we should focus on that more and celebrate it more.
And have more funding for cultural production that reflects that work and that
Yeah,
identity.
Exactly. And more like I would love to see more bilingual media. You know, my dream years ago when I was news director with TC, and I don't want to go over the time, I've always dreamed of like having, it would be so wonderful to have like bilingual publications or bilingual, you know, news outlets, and instead of being separate, because the reality is we don't live separate lives. We're constantly like, when I wake up, you know, I read, my impulse is to read French publications before I read English because I want to know what's going on. And I think that's the reality for most of us. You know, we don't live these, we don't live in silos. You know, we're constantly living these lives where we're interacting with a lot of different, you know, groups. And so, and I think it's important to mirror that and to reflect that and to find ways to celebrate that.
And on that note, it is 10:15.
On time.
Yes, on time. I know you planned it.
I did not. I am just here.
I think we went through all the questions, and it was a fabulous talk.
I hope you found the talk. Listen, I'm not by any means, you know, a professional speaker. Like I said, I spend a lot of time in front of my laptop. I'm someone who's much more comfortable, like in debates, panels, where I feel like I have something that I'm fighting for or against. But yeah, I hope I had something of interest to say, and I hope this was worth your time.
Toula, of course it was. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your work. Good. So now it's time for the break. Thank you all.